Hello Internet, I'm Mo, and this is my first Booktube channel. I discovered Booktube fairly recently through a friend of mine who had been watching it and was really excited to discover that there are a bunch of people on YouTube who just talk about books. And yeah, just love watching you guys and decided I wanted to become a part of that community, partially just because it's exciting, but partially also because I moved about a year and a half ago. And I love where I'm at, but I have fewer friends here who are avid readers, and so I don't get to talk about books as much. So I thought, why not just talk about books with you guys? So I'm really looking forward to getting to know you all, and yeah, excited to join this community. So far as what I like to read, I read a lot of fantasy, a good amount of science fiction, classics, although most of the classics I read tend to be sort of fantasy, science fiction-y classics. But yeah, those are the main genres that I dip into. Occasionally I'll read some other stuff. I do enjoy poetry as well. So that's mostly what you'll be hearing about here on my channel. So far as what draws me to a particular book, I really like just really beautiful, well-written prose, and yeah, when you can just look at a book and read a sentence and go, oh my goodness, that sentence was beautiful. Really love that. I like it when authors do really thorough, in-depth world building and yeah, just the sort of pulling you into that culture of the book. I also really like books that pose questions, especially like philosophical, metaphysical, that type of thing, where through the narrative the author is sort of causing you to ask these sort of difficult questions about life and humanity in the world, and morality and all of those different things. So far as the types of videos I'm planning to make, I want to do wrap-ups each month, some book reviews if I find books that I really like. I also will probably do tag videos, some discussion videos. I'm not planning on doing any book hauls. I don't actually buy books all that frequently, and right now I do most of my reading on my Kindle because I'm not at a place where having a lot of paper books is very convenient and possible for me. Hopefully someday I will be able to have a library in my house with tons of paper books, but not right now. So as sort of an introduction to myself, I wanted to talk about 5 books that I really love. These are not my 5 favorite books because I really have trouble coming up with a top favorites list, but just 5 books that I really enjoy and yeah, what they're about and why I like them. So I lied, these aren't 5 books. 2 of them are series, but I'm counting it as one because it's kind of one story. So the first one I want to talk about is The Chronicles of Narnia, which I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have heard of. And these have been my favorite books since I was a child. Really just love them. And I wanted to talk about them because I think a lot of people have read some, but not all of the series. I've heard a lot of people say that they've started it, read the first book, and then just never read the rest of them. So I'm going to talk about 2 books that are not at the beginning of this series. The first one is right here. The Horse and His Boy, which is in the middle. It's set during the golden age of Narnia, and it's about 2 horses and a slave boy and a girl who's being forced into an arranged marriage who decide to run away together from this sort of Arab-like country which is south of Narnia to get to freedom. And I think this is the book out of the whole series that works best as a standalone, so if you're interested in reading some of Narnia but don't know if you want to read the whole series right now, you can certainly pick this one up. They're really short and quick reads, like 200 pages. So yeah, The Horse and His Boy. And then I also wanted to talk about The Last Battle, which, hence the title, is the end of the series. One of the things I really appreciate about this series is that it's the entire history of a world. So in The Magician's Nephew, it talks about the creation of Narnia. The Last Battle is an apocalypse story, and it talks about the end of Narnia. This is the book that I've read the fewest times out of this series. I've read most of them like probably 10 times. This one I think I've only read 3 or 4, but I think it's my favorite out of the 7. It deals with a lot harder things. It's much darker than the other books. And if you really love the rest of the books, this one can be a little hard because he builds up this world and these characters for 6 books, and then this book's being an apocalypse story sort of tears it all apart. And the characters, instead of dealing with physical enemies like they have in the first 6 books, are now dealing with sort of philosophical, spiritual enemies. which is part of what makes this book darker than the others. That being said, it does have a happy ending, and I really highly recommend it. I would not read this one out of order, however, so if you haven't read the rest of the series, read that first. It will make much more sense when you get to the last book. So yeah, basically this is my way of saying read all of them. The next book I want to talk about, I do not have a physical copy of, and it's The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. This book is about a detective who infiltrates an anarchist organization in turn-of-the-century London and is trying to sort of thwart their schemes, but discovers partway through that some of the other people who he thought were anarchists may actually also be double agents like he is. So he's trying to figure out who he can and cannot trust while trying to stop their plotting. And it's a really fast-paced, really interesting book. Goodreads describes it as a metaphysical thriller, so there's a lot of sort of philosophical, metaphysical ideas in here, as well as this really fast-paced, action-y storyline. And yeah, I think it's one of those classics that not a ton of people have read, but it's just really awesome and a lot of fun, so you should look it up. The next book I want to talk about is actually a collection. It's English Fairy Tales, collected by Joseph Jacobs. I really love fairy tales, always have, grown up reading them, and I think not a lot of people have read this collection. I think actually not a lot of people on Booktube have read very many fairy tales at all, even like the Grimms and Andersons, which are more well known. But I have read those. I really like the English Fairy Tales. It's my favorite collection right now. And I just wanted to quickly talk about 3 of the fairy tales that are in there, and if anybody's interested in reading just a single fairy tale, if you don't want to pick up a whole collection, they're public domain, so they're free on the internet, and I'll put links down in the description if you're interested in looking one up. The first one I wanted to talk about is called Childe Roland, and it's about a boy whose sister runs around the church widdershins, which is the wrong way, and the fairies are able to capture her because of this, and each of his brothers in turn goes to try to save her. So that's what the story's about. What I find really interesting about it is that it's a cantafable, which means that it flows back and forth between prose and verse throughout the story. So it might have like 2 stanzas of verse and then go straight into prose and then go back and forth just throughout the narrative, and the characters, I think, switch back and forth as well. So I found that really interesting and just a really fun read. The next one I want to talk about is also a cantafable, and it's called The Red Ettin. And it's about a boy who has to try to save someone from a giant by beating the giant at a game of riddles. The third one is The Laidly Worm of Spindleston Heugh, which is about a girl whose evil stepmother turns her into a dragon and how she becomes a girl again. So if you're interested in reading a not too well-known fairy tale, those are some ones that I really like that you can look up. The next book I want to talk about is actually another series. It's a duology, and it's The Orphans Tales by Catherine Valente. This is a retelling or a reimagining of Arabian Nights. And if you haven't read anything by Valente, she also wrote The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland, which is also wonderful. Her prose is just gorgeous, and her imagery is just, she uses these metaphors that are beautiful, but ones that you wouldn't expect, and just love her writing in general. And this series is also really interesting because it has what I like to call a nesting doll plot structure. So it's like those little Russian dolls where you've got a story within a story within a story, essentially, and you go in and out throughout the books. Because of that, it is not a fast read, because every time you get through a chapter, you basically have to reset to reading a different character's story, and you stop midway through character stories and then start up again later. And there are a lot of characters to keep track of, but it's just a really well-written series, and yeah, if you're interested in fairy tales or retellings at all, and this has got a very Eastern, sort of Arabian, East Asia sort of feel to it, and yeah, just really cool. The last book that I wanted to talk about today is A Canticle for Leibowitz, which I actually just read recently and really loved it. It's the best book I've read this year, definitely. And this is a science fiction novel. It's written in 3 parts, so it begins in this sort of post-apocalyptic dystopian time period, and then moves to a more sort of medieval-esque when they've gained some of the technology back. time period, and then in the end it's this high-tech science fiction sort of setting, and it follows a group of Catholic monks who their order was founded during that dystopian period to try to preserve the knowledge of the former age, which is our time. And so they smuggle and copy books of all sorts of different subject and varieties and whatnot, and they hide them away and try to preserve that knowledge throughout the ages so that people can use it again when civilization has sort of come back to being ready for it. And I just really, really loved this book. It's so well written. The characters are so well done. I remember when I was going through it thinking, oh my goodness, I even like all of the antagonists in this story, because all of the characters are really just well-rounded people, and the protagonists have their views and the antagonists have different views, and everyone is acting on how they think things should be, but because those things are not the same, there's conflict and clashes. And yeah, I think this is, as it follows a group of Catholic monks, a very Christian book in some ways, but I think if you are not a Christian and not coming from that viewpoint, you could still really appreciate it because the viewpoints of the other characters are so well put forward. And so yeah, a very thought-provoking, wonderful read. You should all look this one up, really. Not enough people have read this book. So yeah, that's all I have for today. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you guys. If you have read any of these books or are interested in reading any of them, please leave me a comment down below. Love to hear about that. And I'll be seeing you guys soon. Bye!